Y'all, can you hear me? This is a whole thing, and on my previous one, I was like asking, can anybody hear me? And of course, you couldn't hear me asking you, can you hear me? So, hmm, I wonder if anybody can hear me now. I'm just gonna wait for a minute and see what happens. Um, yeah. Oh, yay, you can hear me now? Okay. Well, that's lovely. Y'all, I don't know what it is. It's something in my computer settings, and I don't know. But hopefully, hopefully one day I'll figure it out. Um, Loud and clear. Wonderful. Thank you, Victor. Okay, so I was just going on and on, as I'm sure you can imagine. But let me find what I was going on and on about. How about that? Um, okay, so I'm Pastor K.C. Hi, associate pastor and director of family ministries at Foundry. I'm coming to you live from Nashville for this good noon. Um, I was recommending worship to you and talking about how powerful Pastor Ginger's sermon was, and the music from yesterday was beautiful and awesome as well. And then I also wanted to acknowledge the abhorrent acts that happened at Asbury UMC, Luther Place, and Metropolitan A&E. And I invite you to go to Asbury's Facebook page to read a statement from Reverend Dr. Ianther Mills, and also our bishop, Bishop Latrell Miller Easterling, has also released a statement that can be found on the Baltimore Washington page. You can also hear Reverend Dr. Ianther Mills' statement read in our worship service yesterday. So I'll refer you to those places to hear some response to those acts that happened at those various churches. Um, I am back. I have been on Sabbath and have been dealing with some health issues, but I am on the mend, and I am so glad to be back with you today and glad to be back where you can hear me. It seems to be a daily struggle to figure that out, but maybe one day I'll get it right. Um, so I've been thinking a little bit about how, for the past week or so, the pandemic grief has sort of hit me stronger than it has been hitting me. And I don't know if I'm the only one, but I actually think that news of a vaccine, which is exciting and like, oh my goodness, so amazing, also has sort of led me to kind of post process and think about what we've been through for this last many months. Sort of the beginning of the end of the pandemic, perhaps, has caused me to think about all of this grief that I've kind of delayed, honestly. Um, and I have been struggling and dealing with some pain recently, and I've been thinking about the ways in which I kind of try to delay pain as well, until it all sort of hits me like a ton of bricks. Um, so I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about how oftentimes the connection that we make with pain and grief and sadness and hurt and all of those things is darkness. Um, Sort of feeling like we're in the dark, with no clear path and perhaps without any help, alone. Um, and that brings me to my tattoo. I don't know if I've ever talked about this. I may have already, and if I have, and you've heard about it, I'm sorry. But these two birds are nightingales, and I got those tattooed on me after having come through a really a really horrifying experience, actually, at a my first job out of college, and it was, it was dark, it was lonely, it was scary, in some ways it was kind of evil, on earth. And yet there was something about being in that dark place, where I felt really strangely connected to the source, to God, in ways that I could talk to God about my anger, where I could scream at God, be angry at God, all of those sort of emotions, um, that I was raised to kind of not express those emotions to God, but in many ways, being able to express those emotions kind of made my awareness of the source and of God, more visceral. Like I felt more presence, in what could be considered darkness. And so I got these nightingales, birds that sing at night, and there are two of them, because I have been in that place and didn't feel as alone as perhaps I thought I would. Because it's one thing to feel like a human has abandoned you, right? But it's quite another thing to feel like the source of the universe and the orchestrator of the world, has sort of left the building. That's that's quite a thing that can kind of throw you off kilter. So um, it was it was to my surprise and amazement that it actually didn't happen that way. Which is strange because that's kind of not what I've been told, right? That's kind of not the narrative of that we hear in some of our churches. So, or at least when we're younger. Um, this is a good noon. So if you're new around here, mostly don't give segues. So we'll just go straight into something else. Um, Taylor Swift released a new album, and it's called Evermore. And I just want to say, like, it ignites my inner mystic. Her two albums that she's released during the pandemic, Folklore and Evermore, are really mystical. They're like constructing and creating new, like new scapes and new stories. And so anyway, if you're a mystical person, or that sort of thing excites you, uh, these two new albums are pretty cool. I also preached a sermon not that long ago, that included sort of a forest scape, and yeah, I just imagine like Taylor Swift's albums playing behind that scape as well. So yeah, just a random endorsement. So I've been reading this book. I don't know if you can see it. Let's see. Yep, Learning to Walk in the Dark, by Barbara Brown Taylor. I've like highlighted so many things. It's amazing, but in this realm of thinking about darkness, of thinking about being alone in darkness, about our sort of like unsettled posture with darkness, this book is really speaking to me, and so I just wanted to share a few things from this book. um, Barbara Brown Taylor is phenomenal and amazing, and yeah, this book is no exception. So I'm just going to share a few things, and maybe we can think about how they connect. I had no way of knowing that the darkness was as much inside me as it was outside me, or that I had any power to affect its hold on me. No one had ever taught me to talk back to the dark, or even to breathe into it. The idea that it might be friendly was absurd. The only strategy I'd ever been taught for dealing with any fear of the dark was to turn on the lights and yell for help. Even then, when my parents came back to ask what I was afraid of, they would take my answers at face value. There's no monsters under your bed. They assured me, getting down on their knees to look. There are no witches in your closet, they said, opening the door to show me, as if scientific proof would make a bit of a difference once they had turned the lights out and left the room again. This sort of it was speaking to me with regard to the situation I was talking about earlier, about the idea that the darkness might be friendly. Yeah, so I thought that passage was particularly poignant. This one's interesting. Talks about the full solar version of Christianity, which this is kind of what I was getting at before. I was suffering from the full solar version of Christianity, dedicated to keeping young people like me out of as many dark places as possible, including but not limited to smoky nightclubs, back alleys, dark bedrooms, shady dope dens, and dim jail cells. In many ways, it was just what I needed at that point in my life. It scared me straight. It turned my face to the sun. It offered me a map with a clearly marked path on it and answered all my questions about why I should not stray from it, but it also saddled me with a kind of darkness, disability, that would haunt me for years to come. Being alone outside on a dark night began to panic me in ways that it never had before. Sure, everything might look beautiful on the surface, a full moon, a bright path, trees throwing shadows at my feet, but who knew what dark spirits were hunting those woods at night, just waiting for someone like me to come along. I was thinking about how recently I've had this strange urge to go and walk at night. And I've been sort of on this mystical journey for several years now, but I've been thinking about how I've had this like really sort of deep pull to the beauty of the night, and have been thinking about walking in the dark. And my husband, whom I love dearly and who is wonderful and amazing and is also terrified for my safety most of the time, was like, that's not a thing that we do. We don't walk at night. We don't walk at night. But it does speak to this sort of constructed solar version of Christianity dedicated to keeping us out of the dark, which is interesting because the dark has so many things to teach us. There's this really powerful moment in this book where she talks about drawing her feelings. So she thinks about perhaps like anger or rage, and drawing what that feels like on a body, sort of like where you feel that emotion, and what that looks like. And what she realized when she drew various emotions, she drew joy and rage and sadness and hurt. She realized that she had segregated her feelings without even thinking about it, putting all of the dark ones on one side and all of the light ones on the other. Who had taught me to do that? The sorting was so automatic that it had not required any conscious effort at all. Was it simply the difference between pleasant and unpleasant emotions, or was there more to it than that? Clearly all the drawings were true, which made them all valuable in some way or another. Sadness went to parts of my body that joy did not touch. Rage had the most horsepower by far, but only until it ran into hurt. Then those two fell into each other's arms and cried until relief covered them both. Even though I had drawn the emotions on different pages, there was no keeping them apart. The only real difference between anxiety and excitement was my willingness to let go of fear. Sometimes when I was anxious, all I had to do was take a deep breath and my nervousness would turn into anticipation. So talking about the ways that we like to sort of think about our emotions in really binary ways, and her imagining those emotions sort of backing into one another or taking care of one another. So just a really interesting image to think about. In this piece, she says, there were nights of great loss. The soul suffered from fearful subtraction. Yet a great emptiness opened up where I had stored all my spiritual treasures, and yet what? And yet what remained when everything else was gone was more real than anything I could have imagined. I was no longer apart from what I sought. I was part of it, or in it. I'm sorry I can't say it any better than that. There was no place else I wanted to be. And that's sort of in response to folks wondering about sort of how or why the darkness is a meaningful space to be in. And here she offers some practical advice. And then I think there's just one more piece. This is not a how-to book, but if it were, the only instructions would be to become more curious about your own darkness. What can you learn about your fear of it by staying within it for a moment before turning on the lights? Where can you feel the fear in your body? When have you felt that way before? What are you afraid is going to happen to you, and what is your mind telling you to do about it? What stories do you tell yourself to keep your fear in place? What helps you stay conscious even when you're afraid? What have you learned in the dark that you never could have learned in the light? Whatever it is, it's bound to be different for you than it is for me. It's also bound to change, since endarkenment, like enlightenment, is a work in progress. Endarkenment, I think, that's a new word I'm going to meditate on, I think. Endarkenment. The best thing I can say is that learning to walk in the dark has allowed me to take back my faith, removing it from the glare of the full solar tradition to recover by the light of the moon. Now the sun still comes up, but it also goes down. Blessing the day means accepting my full quota of light and of dark, and even when I cannot possibly see what I am blessing. Is this dangerous? Perhaps. At this point, I am more afraid of what I might leave out instead of what I might let in. I want it all. Yeah, it's just a super powerful book. I would totally encourage you to get it, especially if this is something that you are dealing with. I also I couldn't help but recognize that when she's talking about the full solar version of Christianity, I mean, and thinking about the United Methodist Church putting out a resource on anti-racism called From Darkness to Light, I couldn't help but think about the ways in which that sort of predisposition to light has definitely sort of informed the ways that we are in community together and the ways that we are not in community together, and thinking about how it's contributed perhaps to our inner racism and inner white supremacy as well. So that's just worth noting. But I think this, in many ways, it's yes, learning to walk in the dark and thinking about all the spaces there is pain and grief, etc. But also it's all of it. It's all of it. And it's enlightenment as well as endarkenment. And yeah, it's a really powerful book. So anyway, I don't know if you all are struggling with pandemic grief this week, or if you have any sort of delayed emotions that you haven't worked through, or if you feel like in any way that God will abandon you in the darkness. I am sort of a living testament that isn't the case. And that actually, in many ways, I felt closest to God in some of the darkest moments of my life. And so anger is a prayer. A shout is a prayer. And I can't feel you right now is a prayer. All of those things are appropriate and acceptable and received into love. And so my hope would be that you feel less alone, that you're able to sort of notice your fear, but to see the ways in which your emotions are holding one another, the ways in which they are communicating with one another, that you may be able to notice where you're feeling your emotions in your body. Yeah, all of those things. So no segue. It's been awesome to be with you. I'm so sorry that I had some audio issues up top. I hope that it won't be the case moving forward, but technology is, it's the devil. That's what I always say. So, but it's also a great gift. So I love all the things, but also, yeah, it's difficult. So thanks for sticking around with me. I want to make sure that everybody knows about our Christmas worship services. So on December 21st, we'll have a longest night service, the night of the winter solstice, which will be at 7 p.m. You can find it in all of the places you find our regular worship services. And then on Christmas Eve, we'll also have a Christmas Eve worship service at 7 p.m. Again, you'll find it in all the places you find us. And I hope that you will stick around and see what's going on this week on our social media pages as well. I love you. I miss you. Let's seek some endarkenment. And as always, good noon, everybody.